Thank you very much for coming out on a Saturday night. I wasn't expecting so many people, and I'm really honoured. And thank you for flying all the way from
Madrid
to be here.
Yeah.
I'm honoured.
Is this too loud?
No.
All right. Okay. Thank you, David, for coming here, and thank you all, and welcome. We are going to speak as two writers. Let's try to do something intelligent. Hopefully.
Almost an oxymoron there, but we'll do our best.
When Mika told me to host this event,
Why did you say yes? That's my first question.
I didn't say yes, in fact. I said no. And then she said, but he's a very nice person. And then, of course I said yes. And then she said, he's a very nice person. And probably she didn't notice this, but she kept saying this for 5 times. He's a very nice person, by the way. Within the sentence, all of a sudden. And then I talked to one of my friends, a very good friend of mine, in fact, Annelies Beck, who's...
Belgian,
Scottish... Yeah, Belgian novelist and TV presenter.
I know she's a nice person.
She's a very nice person. She's a very good friend of mine. And I said, I'm going to talk to David Mitchell on stage. And she said, he's a very nice person. So it is like, it's not only a compliment, but also it was something like a warning. Like, be careful with him. He's a nice person. It's he's an exception. It is like a man who writes, gigantic novels, but also he's a nice person, sort of. And I was thinking, are you a nice person?
How do I answer that, really? How can I possibly answer that?
I have a more intelligent question then.
It's not that it's not intelligent, it's just I can't really see myself from outside myself. And my wife will give you a full story, I'm sure.
Yeah.
If I am nice, I am other things. I'm other things as well. I guess, but aren't we all?
Somebody whom I really trust in his, I trust his intellectual capacity and his understanding of art in Turkey, a friend, once told me that I was too nice a person to be a writer. Do you think there is a contradiction? There's a contradiction of being a nice person and a good writer. Because many people think that being a writer requires a certain amount of egotism, selfishness, egocentric, attitude, and so on and so forth. What do you think about this?
I think it's a very intelligent question.
Thank you.
When people talk about nice, I think about that song by the Smiths. I can't remember what it's called, but Morrissey sings, don't talk to me about people who are nice. I have spent my whole life in ruins because of people who were nice. That's what I think of when I hear the word. Well, nice isn't necessarily nice. Nice can be, to me, it's quite a superficial quality. It's certainly useful in a social context, but I don't think a soul is nice. I think kind of personality, behaviour, these things can be nice. A cake can be nice, and tea can be nice. I'm just about to have some nice tea, so excuse me for a moment. However, deeper down, I don't think niceness goes down. So yes, I think a writer can be nice on the surface. I would agree that someone said a writer needs that sliver of ice in the heart. That is also true. Niceness can almost be a manipulative thing. Niceness can encourage people to relax, to give you their stories, to cooperate. So you can see, I'm admitting in public now that my niceness is totally superficial. Deep down, I'm a real bastard. I think what a novelist also is a journalist. We need to encourage people to give us the good stuff, to tell us things, or at least to keep their guard down when they're talking and we are there. Arrogance, however, I would disagree that writers should be arrogant, or even that writers can be arrogant. I think arrogance has the opposite effect from niceness. I think arrogance just encourages people to think that you're a jerk, and who is going to give their story to a jerk? Also, I think arrogance inflates your ego. Again, I would disagree with your friend perhaps. You have to be egotistical enough to... I was about to say egotistical enough to want to write, to think you're good enough, but I'm not even sure if that is true, if you're focused enough purely, if you're focused purely enough upon the text, upon the art. I don't think ego comes into that, it's just a love of what you do, a love of the craft. However, more seriously, if you start to believe that you are this international literary superstar, dangerous writer, I think you stop, that clouds your vision, you stop seeing correctly, you start to think the world revolves around you. That, I think, for a novelist is professional death.
It makes you too visible, to be invisible like a thief, to steal people's stories, and you become the, focus of the conversation, as you are now. You are answering the questions, whereas in order to keep on writing, you have to steal people's stories. You have to make them talk and, take those stories. No?
Steal is quite a dramatic
you talked
word.
about stealing, that's why I used the word.
Did I say steal? I meant to say short-term loan. Steal that. You don't. I suppose you do steal their story. You steal the archetype of the narrative, and they're what the world is made of anyway. It's like, can a fish steal water? It's sort of where they live. It's what they live in. It's what they move in. And I think us social human beings, our species, we kind of swim in a medium of narrative. It's how we think. It's how we work. It's how we interact. It's all narrative. This is our oxygen, and it's maybe our space and our time. It's this thing, narrative. Now, I might hear a story about you and X, and I think, oh, that's a good story. I borrow that, and I might do that. But by the time I've made it fit, by the time I've processed it, by the time I've changed it to fit it into the jigsaw puzzle of the story, it will probably be unrecognisable to you unless you know I've done it. So is that theft? I don't know.
I don't know, but many people think that in order to write you have to kill darlings, and stealing their stories are a little bit of killing them, I think.
My interpretation of killing darlings is where you've written a really good scene, where you've got this great idea, or this little bit of prose there, this beautiful metaphor that's just gorgeous, and there's nothing wrong with it, and it just radiates perfection. However, it doesn't belong in your story, and you're right, there's nothing wrong with it, except it doesn't belong in this narrative, and the fire of your narrative will burn more brightly without it. So my interpretation of the killing the darling thing is, I never actually kill it. I cut and paste it, and I put it into a file. This is a useful tip for young writers in the audience. You do have to do this. You have to get rid of good stuff. You resist it, but there's this little voice in your stomach that says this doesn't belong here. You know it, and you ignore it, but this voice won't go away. So you cut and paste it, but you don't have to put it into the waste bin on your computer. You can put it into a new file that I call the useful bin. And I put it into my useful bin. That's the way so I don't kill my darlings. I kind of transfer them. I relocate them to the useful bin so that if I ever need them back, I just go there. But never in my career, I have never gone back to the useful bin once. I don't really deserve applause. I just deserve it just makes it easier.
Yeah.
If you don't have to kill your darlings, you just put them in cold storage. Yeah. What's your interpretation of killing the darlings thing?
Well,
What do you think it meant?
Well, the lamp is on you, so you're supposed to answer.
We all saw what you did there, don't we? Yeah.
I think, what I understand from it is how many people are you ready to leave behind in your travel of writing? That's it. Maybe it's because I'm a woman.
I mean, real human beings.
Yeah.
And right, wow, that's quite a hardcore interpretation.
Yeah, writing is mostly traveling to me as well. It's those two things, road and writing. It's always together. So I'm always leaving a place. Therefore, I'm leaving people. Therefore, they're becoming I'm relocating them in a different useful bin where I can go back, and which I never do, by the way.
You sound like a character from a 1974 Bob Dylan song.
Really?
Yeah.
Tell me the song so I can make it an epigraph to my new novel.
You would be tangled up in blue if you were a Bob Dylan song.
Yeah?
Does anyone know that song?
I cannot remember.
Well, you're so many millennials. Who's Bob Dylan?
I felt young as well. I don't remember the song.
Seriously. Early one morning, the sun was rising. I was laying in bed, wondering if she'd changed it all, if her hair was still red. And then he's thinking about the people he's left behind, or the women he's left behind. Some are mathematicians, some are carpenters' wives. I don't know how it all got started. I don't know what they're doing with their lives. It's a great song. Just Spotify it, you young people. Spotify it. Tangled Up in Blue. It's a beautiful song. It's one of his best.
I'm so taking this as epigraph. I don't know what they did with their lives, especially. You talked about narrative, and you mentioned that it's like sea, and you're the fish, and we're surrounded with narrative, so there is no actually stealing someone's story or anything. And I emailed David before this event, and I mentioned some topics that we might talk about. And one of them was the part and the whole, the concept of whole and the parts. Because in your stories, there are parts which seem like impossible to bring together, yet you always manage to create this spectacular whole.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm still learning, but thank you.
And then he answered back and he said, I'm not a philosopher or anything. I'm just writing narrative. And I thought, is there such a thing? Is there such a thing like a narrative without philosophy, or philosophical concepts without thinking about philosophical concepts?
Have you read the Da Vinci Code?
Yeah.
No, I do know what you mean. But I'm more of a plot and character man. I'll slightly repeat myself from yesterday evening, so apologies if any of you are sitting through this twice, but I'd like your opinion too. I think what we do for a living is made of 5 things. I think these 5 things are plot and character, which we all understand, and these are propulsive forces. It's the plot and the character. What happens next? Oh, I really like that person. What happens next? Or even when you're watching something on Netflix, it's this that makes you... 2 other elements are themes and ideas, or style. And style. So that's 3 and 4. Obviously the ideas. What's this about? What are the ideas? How is this relating to you and your life? Style, obviously, the language in which it's written. You have Dan Brown at one end and Nabokov or somewhere at in terms of mastery of style. And then these are whatever the opposite of propulsion is. It's maybe the brake as opposed to the accelerator. These things, you just find this beautiful sentence and you stop reading and suddenly you're out of the narrative and you're just enjoying this experience of seeing words in this combination you've never seen before, and then you just look at you, you're gorgeous, and you're not even showing off, and you end with a comma and an adverb. And then the ideas, of course, and some. It's that quotation from the leopard, the famous one. In order for things to stay as they are, they have to change completely. And they just read a sentence like that. And you are so true. And I've sort of dimly thought that, but I've never seen it expressed so well. These would be the ideas. Structure is neither a propulsive nor a retardant. It's just what. It isn't a just. I think structure is very interesting, and if we get really nerdish later, we could talk for half an hour about structure and have a really wild night in Zagreb. But now some writers, some writers have different relationships with these elements. Sorry, I'll start again. That's a bad sentence. Bad sentencing. Different writers have different strengths, and they have loves for some of these elements. Other of the elements they simply sort of do. I mean, George Louis Borges was not remotely interested in character. He was a pure ideas man, and he's brilliant. Trying to write a novel in that format, he'd be in trouble, but he doesn't. He just writes these ideas-led novels. These ideas-led micro-stories, almost. Most of the big novels for sale in airports where the author's name is in big gold letters. These do plot. They don't have a single idea in their heads, and they're actually quite dull. I'm in a minority because they sell much more than I do, and that's fine, and it gets people reading, I don't mind, but Jean-Paul Sartre, if we want to get French and existential, again, obviously it's the ideas. Some writers are primarily stylists. Is that right? Bruno Schultz? Style, it just breaks your heart. Just beautiful, strange, synesthetic, prismatic prose. It's just brilliant. No characters to speak of.
Yeah.
But the prose, the style is just. It's the finest wine. No one's ever made finer wine out of words. What I mean when I say I'm not a philosopher, I'm not an ideas-led writer. I would agree there are ideas in my novels. For me, perhaps the ideas, they might be like yeast in bread. Absolutely crucial. You need it to rise and to kind of not be inedible dough. However, you don't need that much yeast. I love the characters. I like to get inside people's heads. I like to understand how they think. I like to write their backstories and their histories and then hide it while letting the reader know it is there. I love this stuff. I'm fascinated by people. I've neatly divided these 5 elements off, like a chemist in a laboratory. Like a chemist in a laboratory, it's something of an artificial process. Of course, you can't really write about a character and reproduce a human being, make a human being out of words, without ideas being in that. In the real world, and in sort of the real world of the novel, these things are much more intermingled. Am I making any sense, or am I a little bit hard for just going on for minutes and minutes and minutes?
What do you think?
It's making sense.
Great sense.
I do have to check sometimes. My wife warns me to check, because I sometimes go off and then she says, well, I have no idea what you just said for the last 30 minutes. So I will check on that. But so I guess I came to the end of it there, but...
Somewhere in the beginning you said novelists are also journalists because you make people talk about their stories, you observe.
I encourage and put them at ease.
That's a great expression. So you are, putting yourself, when you say journalist especially, or, stealing people's stories and so on and so forth.
Short-term loan.
Okay.
Not stealing. Borrowing.
Stories. You are putting yourself in the observant role there. So, does writing protect you from life and the necessity or the obligation to participate in life? And being an observant, does it feel secure to you, for instance? Obviously, this question comes from my own feeling of, this feels secure, writing and being a journalist, so I don't have to, participate as much as they ask me to participate, and so on and so forth.
Another rather deep question, if I may say so. Yeah. I think there are yeses and nos in my answer. Yes, I'm in control. Of course, when you write a novel, you are the absolute master of the universe. You don't have to have meetings with accountants like in filmmaking. You don't have to collaborate, which can be quite lonely, as you know, but you don't have to sit like my brother does, who works in an office for a 2-hour meeting, whose only purpose is to reinforce the hierarchy of the office. You don't have to wait. So we're very in control of our work, of course. So in that sense, yes, it's secure. Perhaps there are novelists. Yeah, there are some novelists who are. I know a few. You could describe them as disengaged from life as they can be. The problem is that's going to limit what you can write about. You can only write about characters who are disengaged from life. And disengaged scenarios. Some of them are really good. One or two would be some novelists I hold highly in regard. However, once you have kids,
I was going to ask that.
Goodbye disengagement.
Yeah.
That was in my 20s. That was nice, and it's now a dim memory.
Yeah.
If you have a kid with special needs like me, it's even more so. This is parenting with steroids. All disengagement, not a chance, really not a chance. So from that point of view, no, I don't sit in an ivory tower. I'm not the man in the high castle. Literary reference, Philip Pickett. I'm not a man in the high castle looking down at the world and sort of smugly.
Did it change? I mean, having a kid, and you have a kid with autism. And you are quite vocal about this, and you are also patrons of two foundations, autism foundations. How do you deal with it? First, actually, I'm asking the technical stuff. How do you divide time? How do you find time to writing? How do you organize the time? And what did it change in your life? Having a kid with autism. I have a nephew with autism. That's why I'm, very comfortable asking this. People, mostly out of politeness, they, hush hush when it comes to autism or any kind of handicap situation, or like special kids, as they call it. But I think this should be talked about more and more.
Yeah. A large part of the difficulties of living with autism and having a kid with autism. Well, there's the autism itself. That's no cat's cough, as I've learned to say here. It's no piece of cake. It's.
Well, I didn't know that. I'm living here for 2 years. Very nice expression.
So, yeah, there's two questions there. One, how to just
pick one. Like you don't have to answer all of them.
I'll do both. With the kids, and with my son in particular, I'm not organised enough to divide my time. I don't have a schedule. When he needs me, I'm there. When he doesn't need me, I'm writing. When he's at school, I'm writing. If it's shower time, something, I'm there. If it's homework time, I'm there. And when I'm not there, I'm writing. So just be free-floating and kiss any idea of a schedule goodbye, because autism laughs at schedules in some senses. But that would be true whether or not my son had autism. You juggle. My wife's great, actually. She does a lot of stuff to buy me time in order to buy time to let me write. Right, the second bigger question. What was the second bigger question again? It was bigger. It was
huge.
and
What did it change in your life?
Oh God, what didn't it change?
Yeah. Actually, not in your life practically, but like you are looking at humans, and obviously you're looking to your own kid, and autism is very difficult in the sense of you don't get the emotional response that you are, expecting. Or that's a different being, sort of, a kind of being. That's a different way of being. I'm sorry, way of being. So, what did it tell you?
Well, firstly, you do get the emotional response. It's just you're not reading it right. You're reading the emotional response in. It's a word that only insiders know. It's still neurotypical. So, if you don't have autism, you're neurotypical. So you're reading an autistic response in a neurotypical way, and you don't get it, and you often misinterpret it as no response.
So you see it as a different language, sort of,
yeah.
A different narrative.
Yeah, yeah. Even more so if the autistic kid in question is non-verbal, which in turn is a tricky label. So my son's never done what we're doing now in his life. This sort of this table tennis of question, answer. You say this, I say that. It's just not what his brain is wired to do. However, he would have a vocabulary of thousands in English and in Japanese. And if you asked him to go up the stairs and get the red book from the third shelf along, and then pretend to sneeze, and then come down the stairs again, he could do that. So does this make him non-verbal or not? I don't know. It's a nomenclatural dilemma more than a linguistic one even. But you were saying what's it changed, and I said what didn't it change?
In your writing, or in your perception of human being, because it obviously it adds a different narrative to the present the definition of human, this autism, and I see it as a not different narrative, but it's becoming an identity as well. Autism, people with autism in their later ages, like in their 20s or so, they started shooting videos telling about why they do things. They sort of translate themselves to normal people.
Precisely. Many of the difficulties come from what we were just saying. I wasn't reading behaviour rightly. Society doesn't read autism right either, and through its ignorance, it makes autism harder. Autism's already tough. There are sensory issues. Some kids with autism, some autistic kids, people will be processing stimuli from the senses in very different ways. You might be hypersensitive, so you have heightened senses, and the perfume that someone's wearing at the back of the room might just be, it might be as if it's sort of rammed up your nostrils if you're neurotypical, or you might be hyposensitive, not sensitive enough. You could cut your leg badly and not notice, and only notice when the blood, and your dad only notices when blood's trickling out of you. So, and this is with all of the senses, and senses number 6 and 7, which are proprioception. That is the one that tells you where your body parts are. We use it all the time. If you walk upstairs in the darkness, you can walk upstairs because your proprioceptive sense is telling you where your leg is, for example. That's why it works. It's just thrown ever so slightly at the top when you step on a step that isn't there. If you've ever done that, maybe not. You always have lights on your stairs in Croatia, I understand. There's another one. There's proprioception, and there's the one to do with balance. It's one in the ear. It's one that says if we're vertical or not. So even more senses than the 5 can be miswired or wired differently, wired problematically.
Yeah.
So, our world is neurotypical world designed by neurotypicals for neurotypical convenience, and populated by people who, by and large, still, it's not their fault, and I would be the same. Their idea of autism is still either the Rain Man or the Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime or Sheldon Cooper from the Big Bang Theory. He's probably the most famous autistic fictional creation. However, he's also very high functioning. He's overly verbal. He's more like a Vulcan than most autistic people I know. And there's still a lot of popular misconception which gives rise to fear. There's a lot of people would still believe that your autistic kid will not love you, which is, believe me, it's so wrong, but it's still, that idea is still out there. There's the idea that autistic people have no theory of mind. They don't get that that other people have minds. So there's a famous experiment, a blue doll and a pink doll. They're in a little room, and there's a chocolate coin put into I might watch this, but it's put into a chest. In this experiment, the autistic kids and neurotypical kids are shown. The blue doll goes out of the room. The pink doll gets the chocolate coin out of the chest and hides it under a sock. I don't know. Then the blue doll comes back in, and if you ask a neurotypical kid, according to the experiment, where is the chocolate? Where is the chocolate? Where will the blue doll think the chocolate is? Then the neurotypical kid will say, in the chest. Ask autistic kids, according to the experiment, where will the blue doll think the chocolate is? This is so complex. Then the autistic kid will get the chocolate from under the sock. The idea being, well, this is allegedly proof that the autistic kid isn't thinking that the blue doll has a mind. And so this famous experiment, it's by a British psychologist, is allegedly proof that autistic people don't get that other people have minds that will be thinking differently to themselves. It's not this complicated, folks. I apologise. You can Google it and get a much simpler version. You must be thinking, what is he talking about? The bit of socks, chests. But again, no, it's wrong. My son knows I have a mind. My son knows if we're walking along the road and it starts to rain, then my son will put my hood over my head because he knows that I'm not going to like the rain falling on my head, and he wants my hood on. So lots of misconceptions. So one of the first things you learn on this journey is that thankfully the misconceptions are wrong. Another big one, if anyone's in this situation, you've had a diagnosis for a kid with autism and they're 3 or 4 years old, the experts will tell you, you have to get early intervention now. You have to get speech and language therapy now. You have to get occupational therapy now. Because if you don't, by the time he's 6 or 7 or 8, it'll be too late and the brain is fixed. So you have to hurry. And of course, in most state service contexts, there is no hurry. You'll have to wait ages to get anything, and even that won't be any good. Don't worry. Believe me, my son was 6 years old and he's just a different kid now. He's 12. We forget to see that the experts, the heroes really, are the kids themselves, and they are spending all the time that's invisible to you while you're just while you're feeling sorry for yourself, getting angry, or they're working on it the whole time, and we don't see that, especially if they can't communicate. We really don't see it because they can't talk to us about it. Going on and on. I'm sorry, but just things I'm learning. You have to be more patient. So my son's taught me to be a better version of myself. I tried being angry, I tried denial, I tried self-pity, I tried shouting. Guess what? None of it works. Yeah. Guess what? Autism just laughs at these things. The only thing that works is patience. So certainly my son's taught me to be a more patient person. He has a sister, my daughter, who she's 16, and I've very proud of her, and we've never had an argument, never had a cross word really. She once said, it's a little bit heartbreaking, but I'm still really proud of her. She said, "Dad, you and Mum have got you've got enough on your plates without a grumpy teenager in the house." So I'm not going to do that to you. It's just, wow, what a kid. There is nothing like having an autistic brother to teach you that life isn't fair and to not complain that life isn't fair. You know, for me, if me or my wife or my daughter complain that things aren't fair, it's just rude to our son. It's really not fair for him. And so certainly autism teaches you that. You have to be more empathic with anyone whose life has gone off script. There's a script where nothing is wrong, and you go through life and it's a breeze, and you have the right number of children, and there's nothing wrong with them either, and you have your job which you never lose, and you have a good pension plan, and you retire. So it's this sort of on-script life, but actually, especially as you get older, it's rather illusory and possibly even damaging. We can all be kicked off this next minute. You have a heart attack, you have a stroke, you might get a diagnosis. The things that we get diagnoses for as adults. At the end of our lives, we may well get dementia. Statistically, probably a third of us will.
You're such a good conversationalist. This is my phobia, by the way. I cannot even talk about it because that's my nightmares or Alzheimer's and so on. No one wants it. It is a nightmare, but we have to have a better response than fear, because it will come. It's happening to us, and if our only response is fear, what use are we going to be? This was a story with autism. The only response was fear. So the solution was to not treat them as humans, forget that they had anything like human rights, disqualify them from it, put them in an institution forever. Just last century, really recently. That's not good enough. And it doesn't have to be that way. All we need is knowledge. That's all. It shouldn't be too much to ask. So, as you can see, I'm more pink and red than I was a minute ago, and I'm speaking many more words per minute, and I feel very passionately about this. And probably my two most important books aren't here, but the two most important books are ones that my wife and I translated. I was going to ask about that, in fact. I cannot pronounce the name of the guy, that's why I couldn't memorize it. You translated the book from Japanese, and the writer was autistic.
Yeah.
20-year-old, 18-year-old.
Well, he wrote the first one when he was 13.
Yeah.
He's non-verbal, can't... If he was here, you would think there would be no mistaking. It's classically quite profoundly autistic to look at him. Can't talk, has trouble staying in one place. It's quite hardcore, but he can write. He writes by pointing to the letters of cardboard keyboard. He can actually work on a keyboard as well, but in Japanese there's lots of drop-down menus to make it work, and they can be a bit distracting for him. But he can do it. And he's written, so he's a writer, and he writes about autism. And when our son had when we got the diagnosis for our son, of course, we tried to read about it, and many of the books were really depressing, or they were by very high-functioning autistic people, by the Sheldon Coopers, or they were by specialists, and all of these are fine, they have their place in the ecosystem, but there wasn't really anything really helpful to us to explain why our son would repeatedly hit his head on the floor, or anything like that, when he was very young. But then my wife got this book in Japanese, and she just started to read it, to translate it over the kitchen table, really, and many of what Naoki says, many of the chapters, it's written in a large number of very short chapters about how I remember, how my memory works, how pain works, whether or not I dream. It's all the things I would have loved to have asked our son but couldn't. they were there. Now, it's also true that if you know one person with autism, you know one person with autism, and that everyone's autism is different, and where personality starts and autism begins, who knows? But certainly, over half of these chapters were pretty much directly applicable to our son, which is really helpful. So we translated it illegally, just to give copies to the people who work with our son, and then my agent and publisher got hold of it, or they heard about it. Let's just have a look, and and it's now in about 34 different languages. It was this incredible hit in about 2013.
We definitely need more books like that. You lived in Japan, and earlier when we were having coffee in the bar, I asked you, did you know Japanese when you first went there? And you said no. How does it feel to live in a country that you don't speak the language of?
Firstly, it's infantilizing. You don't know how to do anything. That was like me here, basically. Help! Ivan, where are you? Where's the toilet? However, it's isolating, which in one sense also buys you this peculiar air bubble freedom. You are immune to advertisements, you're immune to background noise, you're immune to everything because you don't understand it. As you've probably seen from pictures of Japan, the cities are like magazine pages you walk through, everything is advertisements, and it's visually screaming at you the whole time. But of course, if you don't know what the ideograms, the Chinese characters are saying, then it's actually very quiet visually. It's just another symbol that you don't understand. Quite good for someone who wanted to, or who had aspirations of being a writer. Maybe like my son, it's a world unencumbered by language. Language is useful. I'm not saying this is any kind of a blessing, but as it happens, it forces you to use other methods of understanding, which I guess my son does as well. Non-verbal methods. You have to become better at reading tone, at reading faces, at gathering other kinds of evidence that aren't relying on text to interpret reality. And perhaps in some ways this was good for me as a writer.
Well, I feel like Croatian is a music, and as soon as I will learn it, that music, that melody breaks. So, when you don't know a language, it's a song to you.
Could you describe the song of Croatian? Because I'm still learning.
It's like walking in the snow. It's so good. I love listening to it because I don't understand, and I cannot read the codes. Class codes. Other social codes. It's so relaxing to me because it's lack of input. It's beautiful.
I was thinking yesterday.
And I don't know politics here, which is even better.
Yeah.
There's something bad going on. I'm not asking. Nobody's telling me so.
If you look up the word minefield in a dictionary, then you get Balkan politics. Or Irish politics. Balkan or Irish politics. I was thinking yesterday. For me, the sound of Croatian is like a good quality dark chocolate with nuts in it. You get this lovely smooth bit.
Sounds like joy.
Yeah, it does.
Anyway, so since we talked about politics, let's not talk about politics. No, I'm not going to talk about politics, but one thing is interesting. Nobody talks about Japanese politics. There's no politics in Japan. Everybody is so content with the situation, it's like satisfied. Nobody's doing politics there. Nobody's talking about politics. But actually, my question is, Japan is an island, and you're now living in Ireland. And it's an island as well.
The island of Ireland.
Yeah.
It's best if you have an Irish accent, then you can say island of Ireland.
No, yeah. And before that, I think you were in Britain again.
Yeah.
Before Japan, right? That's a big island, but it's an island. So
I
what
don't
is
write
it
about islands.
Yeah,
Lots of islands.
I was going to say that. What is it about islands? What do you think? In Turkey, in my country, people think that there's certain craziness to people who live in islands. What do you think?
That's what mainlanders say. The islanders say the mainlanders are crazy. So islands, we were talking about this. I was speaking with Petra here. It does seem to be an arts journalist in Zagreb. You have to be called Petra. It is actually, you have to. You have no other name. So apologies. I'll probably recycle some of the ideas. I'm fascinated by the differences between groups of people and the similarities. This is one of the most interesting things in the world, the ways in which we're the same, the ways in which we're not. Demonstrably, in many ways we're not. Where do these differences come from? Possibly sometimes from something as basic as geography, whether we're born on an island or not, whether we're an island nation or not. I won't go Churchillian on you, especially now it's Brexit Island, it's not even, oh God, anyway, it's not good. I want to go through the whole evening without saying Brexit and I just blew it. So it's
I didn't know about it.
You didn't, I just can't think about it, it's so depressing, can't think about anything else at the moment. Whether you're an island nation or not. I think if you're from a small island, then you, historically, just a few generations ago, it wasn't that easy to get on and off it. You had to become a close-knit community.
Mm-hmm.
Your other islanders were everything that in a city other people do. Your fellow islanders were your midwives, your social security system, your banks, your dentists, your doctors, your vets. You were all these things to everyone else. This sort of put self-sufficiency into your cultural, almost your personal, maybe psychic DNA.
Yeah.
And it also made you distrustful of outsiders, because if you're on an island and someone arrives on your island, it is always going to be bad news. It's like when you're at home on a Friday night and the doorbell goes at 8:30, you're not expecting it. It's going to be something you have to handle. It's going to be...
It's not Santa Claus. Obviously.
It's not Santa Claus, no. And so the default position becomes suspicion and possibly even rejection. That's why we think they're crazy. But actually, it is the inherited, necessary survival traits of living on an island. I like islands very much because of the finiteness. What's scary for me is the infinite. What is reassuring to me is an infinity filter. A novel is a kind of infinity filter. When you start it, it could be about anything, but you narrow it down and narrow it down and narrow it down. You strip away that narrative, that one, nothing all this. But darling, I'm killing you. It goes. And it's sort of like finding, as the Renaissance sculptors used to talk about, you kind of get the shape from inside the stone. You don't actually make the shape, you just chip away all the stuff you don't need, and that's your sculpture. And perhaps an island is also an infinity filter. It's contained, it's finite. You can understand it all, you can see how it works. There's no external interference coming in and messing up your beautiful algebraic equation. Am I still making sense, or have I really gone off this track? Just let me know. You kind of do this with your ear or something. Then I'll know.
Okay, we are.
Are you doing that clever thing where you're looking?
Yeah, I'm looking at your watch because I cannot see Mika here. So it is last 5 minutes. So
Really?
yeah.
That autism part went on.
Don't tell me if time flew because you have this lamp on you. It cannot fly for you, time.
God.
The last question is
How
from.
long was I talking about autism? Was that about half an hour? Sorry. sort of a sophisticated talk on literature, and you just got me trying to change the world about autism. Sorry.
Good, actually, because the last question is about changing the world.
Okay.
The last question is from Annelies Beck from Belgium. She wanted me to ask you, are you going to save the world with your next novel? I know you're struggling with the novel now, and she is obviously expecting you to save the world with your next novel.
My aspirations are never that great. I think, well, I mean, in a sense, I think knowing her, there's the serious question behind that is, can this odd little activity called literature influence the world? Would you say?
Maybe.
I mean,
Yeah. I don't know. I don't think she's that naive, but. What are you going to influence, let's say? Or if you could influence something, if you would hope to influence something with the next novel, what would that be?
Only
complicated enough?
No. It's fine. I think only what all decent, reasonably well-written novels do, which is I just think encourage people to become more skilled at slipping out of their own skins and slipping into someone else's skin, getting out of their own shoes and getting into someone else's shoes. I sometimes think all the subdivisions of human beings that there are, obviously gender, male, female, gay or straight, or one zone of the Balkan as opposed to another zone of the Balkan, or
Politely put.
Parent or non-parent. I think there's something more fundamental, gay or straight, more fundamental than all of these, which is, are you the kind of person who can imagine that you might have been born as someone else? Are you the kind of person who can imagine you might have been born in Syria and your own government is dropping poison gas on you and saying that you're doing that? Or you're born in Eritrea, and if you're male, you'll be going into the army forever until you die, until you're shot. Can you imagine you're that person? And therefore, what would you do about it? Or not? Can you imagine you're someone other than you, or can you not do that? I think this is perhaps the most fundamental subdivision of human beings. Maybe this subdivision isn't between human beings, maybe it's actually inside us, like Solzhenitsyn's famous thing about the line between good and evil runs through every single human heart. But perhaps this line also goes, I mean, sometimes perhaps I'm better at imagining I'm someone else than at other times. However, fundamentally, I think you can still do this. I think what literature encourages, if it's for anything, I mean, I'm not sure it has to be for anything, it's a bit like saying, what is the moon for? It's just sort of there, and you go, and maybe that's good enough. However, if literature sort of needs a reason, I think what it's really good at, what the novel's really good at, is providing it's a sort of gym, it's a sort of exercise bike for the part of the mind that helps you imagine you're someone else. So it's not that my next novel will change the world, it won't, I guarantee it now. However, if it's part of a body of work, if it's one in 500 novels that a person will read in his or her life, and that slowly that novel just makes this muscle stronger, whereas that teaches them or helps people to more naturally move towards cooperation rather than competition, or towards empathy rather than not my problem. If it helps people do that, then that's not a bad way to spend a life.
Lovely. Yeah. Their mind now. We're going to get some questions from the audience who would like to be.
It takes courage to go first. if you are the first person asked, then everyone in this room will be admiring it, unless you happen to work for Booksa. Okay,
Yes.
you've.
What is your favorite word?
What is my favourite word? What is my favourite word? I love that question. I asked this to Frankia, I think about a 12-year-old girl who was, whose daughter, she was a part of a group that we were having dinner with tonight, of my lunch, earlier, my dinner lunch. It just went on, we sat down at about 2 and it was still there 4 hours later. It was crazy. You know how to eat here, you really do. And I asked her that, if she had a favourite English word, and she said, activity. And I've never thought of that. It's such a functional word, but I think it's almost easier to do this in when you're a non-native speaker, because first you hear the sound, it's like activity. Activity. And so a favourite word is more to do with the angle that you're looking at it from than actually the word itself. So I'll do a Japanese word. Japanese, it is not widely known. It is the world's genius language at onomatopoeia, and you can actually spontaneously create onomatopoeic words in Japanese according to a set of rules. And you could be the first user in history to say this word, but because everyone shares the instructions on how to make a new onomatopoeia word, everyone else understands it. It's great. There's a special Japanese onomatopoeic word to describe the sound of an inexpertly played violin or a fiddle. It's an adverb, and all these are, and it is kiki kiki. That's just, isn't that great? So that's my favourite word. What's your favourite word?
I can't make my mind up.
Okay,
But
have a think and tell me later,
yeah,
maybe.
I will.
Have you got a favourite word from any language?
Yeah, my favorite word is chatka.
Always a great word. The bit of Russia that sticks out.
Yeah, but it doesn't matter. Like a cha cha cha.
Did you read that really good Argentinian
Yeah.
book? Isn't that great? That's a great book.
Wow, exactly. Yeah.
Kamchatka, that is a great word.
The word, and in Turkish it's jibinik.
Jibink,
Jibinik. Jibinik.
Jibiniki,
Jibinik.
Jibiniki.
It's mosquito net.
Oh,
Sounds beautiful.
You know, Dutch for umbrella is paraplu.
Dutch, is that Dutch?
Yeah.
I think.
Okay. Well, it's also Dutch, then it must be a loan word.
I couldn't believe that such a nice word would be Dutch.
She said that in Dutch people.
Nice.
Anyone watching on the internet, troll her.
Okay, any other questions or comments or ideas? Or did we exhaust you
No,
already?
you just need to leave them a bit of time so that they become embarrassed.
But if you point that out, then they're not.
Please go ahead.
I'm
Thank you.
wondering, how would you make people read deeper? Because I read just recently this beautiful, it was a small comic which was done by Neil Gaiman, and the
Okay.
cartoonist, I forgot his name, but he was kind of in defense of public libraries and reading. And then he said, and then parallel to that, I read this other piece, and the guy talked about the necessity to read slowly and deeply, because overall, there are so many things to read nowadays that you just hoard information and then you lose this effect that you talked about, this nourishing the empathy, because you don't do that. You just, right? So the comic was just to get people to read to their kids and that. But how would you do that? To just get people, do you do that in your novels in some way? Because you kept me, when I was reading Club, at least it was slowly, in a way. So I don't know, have you thought about that? How do you get people to read it more?
How do you get people to read
To read
at all
deeply.
or more deeply?
Even deeply, just more deeply. Or at all, I don't know, whichever one you want to answer.
Thanks so much for coming, ladies. Cheers. Thank you. It's my pleasure. And if anyone needs to leave, especially if you've got a babysitter and this is getting expensive, or if you have a wild rave in the middle of a forest to go to, where is he? You know who I'm talking about. Then go. I did say I wouldn't tell anyone, didn't I? It's okay. You can trust your secret to me. To read at all or to read more deeply? You're saying read more deeply. Okay. To read at all gives them Neil Gaiman's books. That's it. I mean, the one called Fortunately the Milk. I mean, that got my niece reading. There's a sort of it's a bit like drug dealing. You need a gateway drug. And what do you, I don't try to do this. It's just how I like to write. Despite what I said earlier about ideas, I do like. I suppose I like to write the kind of books I like to read, and the books I like to read are ones that you can stop and think about, that do have enough, I suppose, intellectual or imaginative nourishment there, but that also are not The Magic Mountain by Thomas Mann. Where it's a marathon. You find the Goldilocks sweet spot. It's meaty and nourishing enough, but it's not indigestible either, that you still want to know what happens. This really is perhaps why I'm a character-driven sort of author. You sort of use that as a Trojan horse. It's very simple principle. You create a character who is basically likable, maybe in a complex way, but basically likable. Basically, you're supporting, and then you frighten the reader with the probability that something bad will be happening to this likable character. That's it. So that's why you care. That's why you turn the pages. In the meantime, you smuggle through, or you just provide things to think about on the way. Now, it's not quite making someone read deeply, but it's giving, it's just writing fiction that perhaps encourages an engagement with the world at a level that is more than damn vowing. You have to be so careful with the internet these days. I'll probably get a letter from his solicitors or his lawyers when I get home. But yeah, what I'm trying to say, at a deeper level than that, but not so deep that most people will kind of, other than your mother, will give up at page 12. My mum would probably, well, my wife would give up at page 6 probably if I tried that. Is that a kind of answer to your question? Thank you. Someone was saying.
No, I was saying that, but you all read Kant. I mean, as speaking about the.
Yeah. Yes. Do. It's good for you.
Is he your favorite philosopher, or who is?
Favorite philosopher.
I'm not the only one.
I'm slightly embarrassed by. No, I'm not embarrassed really. I quite like modern contemporary crossover philosophers that I have respect for philosophy. No university campus is complete without it. It's the foundation of our civilization. It is invaluable and irreplaceable. And philosophers like John Gray, the British contemporary guy, he writes books that real philosophers might not call philosophy, but they are dense with ideas and they sharpen and illuminate my understanding of the world.
But But I was thinking that your book is more like about this Buddhism philosophy. It's like never-ending life, you know, this thing and reincarnation.
I feel I would be flattering myself if I were to say yes. The book is a fictional incorporation of ancient big wheel Buddhism, not little wheel Buddhism, big wheel Buddhism. I sense in the way you speak that you know what you're talking about,
Yeah.
and I wouldn't try to bluff you anyway, but I'm definitely not trying to bluff you. Philosophically, I'm a bit of a lightweight. There's no way around this. Of course, I love ideas. I'm engaged with ideas. I need them like bread needs yeast.
When Tom Cruise saved the world, like, you know, Ece was asking you, I just had this idea that Ethan saved the world. Maybe he can help with it.
I read my Nietzsche to get this done, if that helps. The eternal recurrence idea is really gorgeous. And actually, I mean, that says more about me than the book or Nietzsche. It's when he writes in series of epigrams, it's Trojan horse. It's so easy to.
Yeah.
Am I about to say that Nietzsche's easy to read? I suppose I am. They're in epigrams. It's almost like Maltesers, just one after another. But when it's inside you, then you read. It sort of starts to work afterwards. After you've finished the book, you continue to read it. Any sense? No, this isn't making a lot, is it?
Because it goes on and on.
Okay, yeah, there's
Yeah.
another question.
Okay.
I think.
Okay, well,
Thank you. I didn't do a great job on that. Apologies, but hey, thank you.
well, we can continue on the Tom Hanks thing. Has having a movie made out of your book changed the way you write now, consciously or subconsciously? Knowing that potentially there's going to be a movie and a movie script made out of your book.
Thank you very much. Sometimes you read books and they're quite good, but the novel is quite transparently a movie pitch, and like that's an Achilles heel in that novel, a really big bad Achilles heel. So I certainly don't want to write those. I think the effect is it's neither consciously or unconsciously. Or maybe it is.
So the baby's going to be more vulnerable to the vultures from the film industry, you know, circling around trying to make.
If the vultures are willing to give me 6 figures into the US dollar. It's thanks to the film. I met Alexander Hamon, one of our friend Sasha, and Lana Wachowski. And they've become quite important people to me. I spent time with them. We worked a bit on a TV show for Netflix. One reason I did that was to learn what filmmakers know about narrative. Professional death for many novelists is slow and long, and it happens because essentially people try to write their hit again and again and again, and the compost heap from which they take nutrients, from which they take ideas, that is fed by experience. It is taken from quicker than it can be replenished. By working in TV and film for a little bit, I was able to put a whole load of really great manure, horse manure, onto my compost heap. And screenwriting is an art, and I wanted to learn what screenwriters know about what they know about narrative, and see if I could apply that to a novel. Not make it more like a film script, but I wanted their technology, just to see if it was in any way transferable. And yeah, with the new thing I'm working on, it's not that it's more like a film, but it's got some sort of nutrients. The way that screenwriters edit, the way that one scene is, like you saw with Cloud Atlas perhaps, one scene will end with a door closing, the next one will begin with a door opening, and the same character, or the same actor, but 500 years later walks through. Lovely little neat fit. Filmmakers invented the invisible scene, where two characters might be talking, a character says, this is a cheesy example, the guy says to the girl, "Would you kiss me?" And the girl says, "No way, never in 1,000 million years will I touch you, you revolting man." Cut. In the next scene, having a kiss. There's an invisible scene in the middle where she changed her mind, where he wooed her successfully. That's so clever. Filmmakers invented that. And I'm sort of interested in applying that to a novel, say. So that's my long and rambling roundabout answer to your question. Thank you.
I think we ran out of time, and I think you would agree with me when I say this. Thank you so much. You're a really good person.
Thank you to Booksa, thank you to your excellent self for flying all the way from Madrid. Thank you for coming. I'm sure there's a lot of really great things to be doing in Zagreb on a Saturday night, and I'm really grateful that you shared a piece of your Saturday night here. And have a safe trip home. Thank you.